It seems like everyone is talking about immigration.
As long as you want.
I went to go buy one yesterday, but I wasn't able to with it tomorrow anyway.
It's great.
So
I love it.
actually, I was getting two.
I hope it actually is recording. Like, listening to it.
You have to make sure, right?
Should be good.
But the conversation is pretty confusing. Who is moving, why, and what effect is it having on the UK?
So what are the facts?
Media often gives mixed messages about migration, so it quickly gets confusing.
The Sun published an article in July about EU migration, but the photograph attached was of the jungle camp in Calais. So what is the difference between EU migrants, refugees, and non-EU migrants? Why would they move to the UK?
Last year, David Cameron, then PM, spoke of a swarm of people. What does this suggest about the number of people immigrating? And is this accurate?
In the last year, net immigration to the UK was 327,000.
Net immigration is the number of people who have entered the UK, immigrated, minus the number of people who have left, emigrated.
It's important to note that British people returning and departing are included in this statistic.
This was slightly lower than last year, with fewer people arriving and departing.
The UK is a country where both immigration and emigration take place.
Around 8.5 million people have immigrated to the UK and around 4.7 million Brits emigrated abroad.
This means around 13% of UK population were born abroad. This is lower than in other developed countries like Canada, Ireland, Germany, and Norway. Lots of different groups of people immigrate to the UK via different routes for different reasons.
EU migrants are citizens of EU countries who move under free movement treaties.
For EU migrants, work is the number one reason for long-term immigration to Britain.
In the year ending March 2016, net EU migration into the UK was roughly 180,000.
Non-EU migrants move to Britain from countries outside the EU using visas.
This includes people moving due to work, study, asylum seekers, or people moving to live with their family, with study being the most common reason.
In the last year, net long-term immigration to Britain was 190,000 from outside the EU, with the majority coming from China, India, and the US.
Asylum seekers come to the UK to find protection from persecution, which forced them to leave their homes.
Last year, there were 44,323 applications for asylum, with the largest number of applicants coming from Iran.
If granted asylum, they are given refugee status.
After Brexit, opinion polls show a majority of the British public want EU workers to stay.
On average, EU migrants working in the UK are young.
They are less likely to claim out-of-work benefits than British citizens.
But are more likely to claim in-work benefits like tax credits, often because they work in low-paying jobs.
A lot of people talk about the effects of EU migrants on wages and taxation, but the evidence isn't clear one way or the other and can easily be interpreted in different ways.
If you are from outside the EU, getting a visa to work, study or marry in the UK is very hard.
For work, new government rules mean you have to earn £35,000 a year to get long-term residence. This excludes many workers.
But many UK employers rely on international labour.
For example, the NHS relies on international nurses to fill shortages.
International students who come here to study pay higher fees than other students.
Non-EU university students now pay 29% of all tuition fees, making them a key source of income for UK universities.
There are also financial restrictions on marriage with non-EU citizens.
British citizens need to earn at least £18,600 to qualify for a marriage visa, more if there are children involved.
This means some Brits in lower paid jobs can't be with the ones they love.
An asylum seeker is someone seeking safety after fleeing persecution, violence and conflict under the terms of the 1951 Refugee Convention.
It is perfectly legal to be an asylum seeker. In fact, there is no asylum seeker visa, so sometimes travelling in unsafe ways, like the back of a truck or a small dinghy, is the only option.
The UK doesn't have a very high number of asylum claims. Only 3% of European asylum claims have been in the UK so far in 2016.
To apply for asylum in the UK, people have to provide a lot of evidence about their situation, which can often be traumatic as they are forced to relive events like torture or rape.
Asylum seekers cannot work in the UK while they wait for a decision and need to prove they are destitute before the government will support them with very basic accommodation and living expenses.
The asylum system in the UK is tough. In the first half of 2016, only 33% of asylum claims were accepted.
But the Home Office doesn't always make the right decision, and many people appeal. In 2016, 44.7% of appeals have been upheld by the court.
Still, many people are rejected and often deported back to their country of origin.
In the UK, a person is officially a refugee when they have their claim for asylum accepted by the government.
Refugee status gives people leave to remain in the UK for 5 years.
Other refugees also come to the UK directly from refugee camps. In this case, it is the UN which gives them refugee status.
The UK has promised to resettle 20,000 Syrian refugees by 2020, but the vast majority of the world's refugees continue to live in developing countries in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. Only 14% of refugees live in developed countries.
Immigration detention is used by the government to detain people in this country without a legal right to remain, to establish their identities, resolve their asylum claim, or to work towards their deportation.
Many different people are at risk of being detained, including failed asylum seekers, people who overstay their visas, and foreign national criminals.
The UK is one of the biggest users of detention in Europe, with 32,400 people entering immigration detention in 2015.
The UK is the only country in Europe where no time limit on detention exists. This means that when someone is detained, they have no idea when or if they will be released or deported.
About half of people who are detained are removed, but many people are essentially trapped as they face multiple barriers to remove, including being stateless, having children and family in the UK, or an outstanding asylum claim.
For those released from detention in the UK, life is difficult. They cannot work while they sort out their immigration status and are left open to exploitation, destitution and homelessness.
Detention centres are run much like prisons. There have been a number of reports recently highlighting the poor treatment of those in detention, including harassment of LGBT asylum seekers, rape of women at Yarl's Wood, and a lack of access to healthcare facilities.
Detention is very expensive, costing the government on average £91 a day per person in 2015.
For these reasons, a recent parliamentary inquiry concluded that detention in the UK was used too much, should have a time limit, and that we should be using community-based solutions more.
Immigration is a complicated issue, made more confusing by all the different stories we hear.
We hope this video helped you get your facts straight about immigration to the UK.
But immigration is more than just facts. It is also the communities in which we live and the amazing new cultures that different people bring to the UK.
As well as the horrific stories of fear and persecution faced by refugees.
and the love stories,
and the stories of exciting new jobs.
and so much more.